looks like this is just fine. I wanted to say that I think freedom is a great topic because it means different things to all of us, as you've seen tonight. And one of the things that occurred to me as I thought about this is that I've experienced so much freedom in my life, and most of us in this country have. And the sad thing is that we get to a point where we start to take it for granted. And when you take it for granted, you then come to realize at some point somebody tries to take your freedom away. And that's when you really appreciate it, when somebody is trying to take your freedom away. And I have a story about that. As I confessed to you in a previous story, I was a lawyer for 40 years in Harrisburg before I retired a couple years ago. And, excuse me, I believed what Clarence Darrow said about lawyers, that the only real lawyers are trial lawyers. And so I wanted to be a trial lawyer, and that's what I was. But I found out over my course of my career that most cases don't go all the way to trial. Most cases settle for one reason or another. So a lot of the actual work I did as a trial lawyer was taking depositions. And I don't know if any of you have ever had your deposition taken. Certainly you've heard about depositions. But what happened in cases I was handling was that when the other side filed a case or I filed a case, I would get from the other side a list of witnesses. And I would figure out which of those witnesses were willing to talk to me voluntarily off the record. And I would take witness statements from them and keep those in my file. But many witnesses were not willing to talk to me voluntarily, and I understand that. So for those witnesses, I had to get a subpoena issued to them and take their deposition. And that became a very routine process. I took thousands of depositions in my 40 years of practicing law, and it became very routine. There was a usual routine. We hired a stenographer to take the testimony, to put the person under oath, and we usually had the deposition in a law office, and usually there were lawyers from both sides of the case there. But occasionally there were unusual circumstances for a deposition, and this case I want to tell you about was one of those. I represented a doctor, a psychologist, who was being charged with malpractice vis-a-vis several of his female patients. And these charges were brought against him by the state licensure board. They were trying to take his license, his psychiatry license, away from him, and I was defending him. So I got this list from the licensure board of all the witnesses they were calling, and not surprisingly, many of them were former patients of his against whom he had allegedly committed this malpractice. So one of them, I had talked to her previously, recognized the name, and I had interviewed her at the Allentown State Psychiatric Hospital because my client had told me, she's there if you want to go talk to her. This was before they filed the charges. So I had gone down and interviewed her, and she was actually very friendly to me, told me what her problems with the doctor were, but I had her witness statement. But when I got the charges filed against him by the licensure board, I looked at what they were saying about her, and what they were charging with regard to her was completely opposite of what she had told me when I interviewed her at the hospital a few weeks before. So I thought, well, I better take her deposition. So I got a subpoena issued. The deposition had to be taken in the locked ward at the Allentown Psychiatric Hospital, State Psychiatric Hospital, where she was committed. And I called them and made the arrangements, and they said, that's fine. You come down, we'll give you the cafeteria within the locked ward. You can use that to take the deposition. The state board's attorney wisely decided not to go and said, go ahead, take the deposition, I'll read the transcript later. So I went down, and I had hired a stenographer to be there, swear the witness in, and take this deposition. When he showed up and met me at the entrance, I sensed for the first time I had a little bit of a problem, because most stenographers are maybe middle-aged or at least mature women. This was a young man. He might have been 25 years old. He looked like he was about 15. He was skinny and frail, and he was already shook by the fact that we were at a psychiatric hospital. And then when he found out we were going into a locked ward, he started actually trembling, and I saw the sweat beads coming out on his forehead. I'm trying to tell him, don't worry, it'll be all right. I've done this hundreds of times. So we go to the nurse who's in charge of the keys for the locked ward, and she takes us to the door of the locked ward and says, okay, I'm gonna let you guys in. Here's the lock. And when you're done, knock on the door, and I'll slide this window open, and you can tell me you're done, and I'll let you out. So we went in. I'm going to hurry up because I'm running a little over time, but we went in. There was no supervision at all inside the locked ward. We were in this cafeteria, and the woman I was taking the deposition of was very angry, and she was very big and strong, and she was in charge of the cafeteria. People wandered in at various times, and she had to wrestle them out. So it was a weird setting, and everything she told me was completely the opposite of what she had told me when I interviewed her a few weeks before. And I finally said to her, why is everything you're telling me completely opposite of what you told me a few weeks ago? And she said, I wasn't under oath then. And I thought to myself, uh-oh, she's smart. So I finished taking the deposition. It was very contentious, and I took the stenographer, and we went back to the door, knocked on the door slides open, a different face from the nurse we had been with looks at me and says, what do you want? I said, we're done with the deposition. She's like, what? I said, we're done with the deposition. We're ready to leave. And she said, who are you? I said, I'm a lawyer. She's like, yeah, I've heard that one before. You know, who's this guy? I said, he's a stenographer. She's like, I've never heard that one before, but let me find out. So she went off to investigate. I thought the stenographer was going to die on me right there. He was beside himself. Finally, of course, she made enough calls that she came back and let us out. And I truly felt an appreciation for freedom when that door opened.